Hello and welcome to another edition of 310 to Left. Tom Caron of the New England Sports Network, along with Alex Speier of the Boston Globe. As always, kind of Black Monday here if you're a Red Sox fan, and losing 3 out of 4 to New York over the weekend. The Carolina contention has been wrapped up and boxed away till next season. We won't need to talk about that. Alex, I used the analogy on the air over the weekend, not to get too morbid, but this American League East race, right? You're always talking about signs of life. Is there a pulse? Is your team still alive? And the Red Sox really were not alive. I mean, I feel Sunday might have been the knockout blow in New York, but really, it was days ago, if not more than a week ago. But I finally, with Will Middlebrooks yesterday, I finally said, listen, here's the deal. This is before yesterday's game. Before the game, I said, listen, there hasn't been a pulse here as far as the playoffs go for a little while. But the EMTs have not put away the paddles yet. They're trying to bring the body back to life. So until they put the paddles away, I feel you can still cling to hope. It's but now, Alex, dear friend, the paddles have been put away. I'm sorry to say that they have wrapped up the gear, and sadly, it was just. Right, in the end, you can't have the most errors, and you can't have the most unearned runs, and you can't have the highest bullpen ERA since the All-Star break and survive the weight of it all, even though the Minnesota Twins tried to give you every opportunity to do that. In the end, there were a lot of good things. The starting pitching was really good over the last month. The offense sputtered, but offenses will do that. It was just the weight of, I think, the defense and the bullpen. In the end, it was just too much for this team to overcome.
Yeah, it's a flawed team, right? Like, it is never like there was one stretch that lasted about 3 to 4 weeks in which it played really exceptional baseball and gave a glimpse of a ceiling that was not the floor. And the floor, as we discovered, in the first half, it looked like the floor was like right around that steady 500, something that Alex Cora always loves. In the second half, it turns out that floor was subject to shattering, and they've achieved depths that I think no one probably anticipated leading into the All-Star break, leading into the trade deadline, where they've been the third worst team in baseball in the second half of the season, and you're probably not going to go anywhere if that's how you play. You're right to point out the deficiencies, bullpen, defense, and then there's been offensive inconsistency as well based on some of the flux that they've endured. So it's a team that has probably done pretty well to remain around 500 overall throughout the season, but there's starting to be that moment of separation. Now, I will point out for those who like to cling to the paddles that there are historically some weird reversals that happen at the end of the season when you do count teams out. Whether it's the 78 Red Sox who collapsed and then reeled off 7 straight wins over the last week of the season. Like, there is a chance if the Red Sox make up one game in the standings before the Twins come to town this weekend, then you're able to have that kind of pretense that the Twins series matters, although, frankly, the Tigers have what is functionally a one-game edge on an extra game of an advantage on the Red Sox, and they're the team that's playing really well right now. But theoretically, there are meaningful games to play. Most likely, this was it. Losing, it was when I thought that it would be okay for the Red Sox to split the 4 in New York, but losing 3 out of 4 and proving unable to really kind of get any kind of consistent quality play in the second half seems like it's pretty much writing things off.
Alex, I don't want to dive too deep into this because I feel this is what we'll do in 2 weeks when we wrap up the season. But looking at these final 12 games, do they matter? Other than going 12-0 or 10-2 and getting playoffs, that matters, right? Okay, but I've sort of been getting into this with everybody at Ness and producers, Will Middlebrooks, just talking about, was this season a step forward? And I think for a lot of fans, it was. They feel better about things now. But if they go 4-8 and fall to 4th place or 5th place and are under 500, I'm not, because I I think you feel better about certain areas of the team. The young players, the outfield certainly feel better. I think the starting rotation is deeper and you feel a little better with guys coming up. But the bullpen, I think you feel worse about than you did a year ago when you sort of felt Martin and Jansen were coming back to anchor the back end. I think the last couple weeks here matter as far as how you're going to look at what this season meant in the progression of the organization.
Yeah, well, a couple of thoughts on that. The first is in 2015, the Red Sox were a last place team, but they had a great last 6 weeks of the season, including really like putting the pedal down right to the end. They were shooting for 5 at that point. They had a lot of work to do to try to catch 500. They ultimately fell short of that because they got swept in Cleveland over the last weekend of the season. But they took on an attitude as a group. Over the course of it, the young players on that team decided this is now our team, and we're going to propel this thing forward. And that was Mookie Betts, and that was Xander Bogaerts, and that was other guys like Jackie Bradley Jr. kind of surging surging down the stretch. It was Eduardo Rodriguez. There were a lot of contributors who proved that they could run hard through the finish line in 2015, and I really do think that helped them to kind of burst out of the gates in 2016 and begin that and kind of open that window of contention. So I do think that there can be significance to the end of the season in that regard. Secondly, you also have guys like Richard Fitz trying to prove that they are able contributors moving forward, that the first 2 starts of his major league career aren't just a mirage. You have other guys trying to define the best versions of themselves. I think particularly on the pitching side, but yeah, I think that Zach Penrod has an opportunity to say, amidst this dreadful bullpen performance, and I would argue that this could be the worst Red Sox bullpen performance ever. I mean that in history, in like the 124-year history of the Red Sox. There are some guys who can help moving forward, particularly as you pointed out, with the uncertainty of the very few anchors that they have in the late innings moving forward.
Okay, again, we'll get to the post-mortem to continue my morbid obsession with morbidity. But I do want to mention...
Beetlejuice this weekend, by the way, along those lines.
There you go.
That seems appropriate, yeah.
Story.
We'll broadcast from the underworld.
2 thumbs up? Did you like it?
Yeah, it was great. It was great.
We'll do movie reviews this offseason. I saw Pearl Jam last night, speaking of 2 thumbs up. And watched Eddie Vedder introduce Peter Gammons, our friend, as Peter Bleeping Gammons at the very end of the show. It was as good a rock and roll moment as I've seen in a long time. Also, a beautiful moment. That wasn't a dry eye in the house. In the middle of it, he played "Just Breathe," the beautiful song that he played alone acoustically and dedicated to Tim and Stacey Wakefield, which was just incredible. In fact, Eddie Vedder had to stop playing in the middle to gather his emotions and continue the song. And I bring that up because in a few weeks you're doing something beautiful in honor of Tim. The Jimmy Fund Walk, the Marathon Walk, is coming up October 6th, the Sunday. It's an amazing event. I've done it before. I'll be there in my role as co-chair. I was going to be in my role as co-walker with you, but duty calls. But you've put together Team 49. Tell us a little about that.
Yeah, well, I just turned 49, and that's usually a silly number, right? Like it's not really a landmark birthday, but I think as so many people have over the course of the last year, I've thought a lot about Tim Wakefield, my friend, and Tim Wakefield, the humanitarian, and what he meant to me and what he meant to so many others. And the thought that last year, even after his cancer diagnosis, he was, I believe that he was intending to take part. My family and I wanted to honor his memory and to celebrate Tim and his remarkable family by taking part in the Jimmy Fund Walk. And so it's going to be that first Sunday in October. Hopefully a beautiful day, but it means a lot to think that 49 means an awful lot in certain contexts, and so I'll be the four Spears will be taking part in Team 49, and we would love to have any support, any participation that we can get to join us.
Yeah, you can find and you can go to the Jimmy Fund Walk page and search Alex or search is it Team 49? Can you find it under Team 49? You know?
Yeah, should be able to, and I'll also have it on my pinned on my Twitter on my Twitter page soon.
And we will as well. We'll put it all up there so you can find it. Yesterday, Sunday, as we tape this, was the annual family festival at Franklin Park Zoo. Lisa Scherber has done an amazing job. It's her it was the 31st event where they take over the Franklin Park Zoo for the day. Any patient who the only connection is you have to still be getting your annual checkup at Dana-Farber. And you get to bring 8 family members. So it is this incredible day. Over 3,000, over 3,200 people were there. They take over the entire zoo, and it's it's pediatric patients who are 2 months into the scariest battle of their life, getting to talk to a 22-year-old student at Johns Hopkins who I got to meet, who's talking about how they beat cancer and giving hope. And it's just a beautiful day where survivorship and hope comes together with people who are in the middle of the fight. And it's just an amazing event. But I bring it up because Brianna Wakefield was there volunteering, as she does now as a freshman at BC. And she brought a bunch of her friends from freshman year at BC, and they were all there. And it's just, they're an incredible family, and they're never far from our hearts. So, Alex, thank you for doing that. That's well done.
It's an honor to be able to do it, and I appreciate the chance to, the chance to talk about it, and of course to talk about and think about Tim and the Wakefields all the time.
Okay, there's no easy way to segue from that, but we will do that, and I'm going to get right to it. We're talking about the number 1 prospect in all of baseball today. Roman Anthony is that man. You know by now, or you should know by now his story. Get to know a little about the man. I'm going to get right to it. Alex, you were with him in Worcester. You sat down and spoke with him. We're going to talk to Geoff Pontes of Baseball America in a couple minutes about the process and what made him the number 1 prospect in baseball. But first, here's the man himself, Roman Anthony, with Alex Speier on the 310 to Left podcast.
I thought he was just done playing baseball.
Here at Polar Park with Roman Anthony, now the number 1 overall prospect in minor league baseball. How's that title sit on you? You change your social media bio or anything?
No, not at all. No, it's great to be recognized, but I think I mentioned it yesterday and in some interviews. It's not the end all be all. Obviously, a nice little achievement along the way. But yeah, I mean, it's nice to be recognized for the work I've put in. But I think the end goal remains the same, and this doesn't really affect it. So it's good for the time being.
Yeah, well, that's the thing I'm interested in, right? Like, what does it mean? Is it? And I think that you just put it out. Like, I think, to me, it's always a reflection of the work that's gone into it, right? It's not like it means that as a second-round draft pick, obviously someone who signed for a good-sized bonus, but nonetheless, second-round pick, you put yourself in a position that's different in the industry than where you were, and that's a reflection of, if you were to define the work that allowed you to become this, that allowed your career to follow this arc, what's been the most important thing?
I think I've just been surrounded. I've been lucky enough to be surrounded by great people. This org, there's a lot of great people that I've run into, a lot of amazing teammates that I've had, and but even outside of that, just back home and in the off-season, the people that I surround myself with, I think the work that I put in, off the field, I've just surrounded myself with great people, and credit to the Red Sox and the org. They've done a great job with everything on the developmental side. So I think I've just been lucky with people around me, but I've also worked my tail off each and every step of the way.
So you're good friends with Jackson Holliday. He was the number 1 overall pick in the same draft that you came out in. He was the number 1 overall prospect entering last year. Different paths to that point, right? Like, really cool that the two of you who are so close get to share that rare distinction.
Yeah.
Did you but when he was drafted number 1 overall, he's supposed to emerge as the best prospect in baseball. Did you feel like, have you had a point along the way in your professional career where you've been able to change your kind of self-perception and say, like, I can hang with anyone in any context?
Yeah, honestly, I think for me, I've always been pretty humble but very confident at the same time. I think going into the draft, I wasn't really worried about where I went. I just wanted to put myself in a good organization and give myself a good chance to be set up in the long run. But I think I always knew deep down that I am that caliber of player, and everyone takes different routes. Obviously, like you mentioned, Jackson going first overall, credit to him, right? It can be even more difficult sometimes to be in that situation when you're supposed to do that, and for him to be able to just go in there and kill it the whole way and succeed and just continue to succeed, and now make an impact at the highest level. Credit to him, right? That's the ultimate goal. But I think, like I just mentioned, going into it, knowing that I can always be that caliber of player, and that there's a lot of great players out there, but I've played it with and against a lot of guys now in the last 2 years, and just knowing every day that I go out there that no matter who it is or how much big league time whoever I'm facing has, that I belong there and that I can hang. And like I mentioned, credit to the Red Sox for putting me in the big league spring training games and putting me in competitive environments, and promoting me last year to a few different levels, and testing me and seeing what I'm made of. I obviously wouldn't be here without the great people that we have up top, who do such a good job on the developmental side of things. But I think it's just a little bit of everything. But like I said, knowing that I am that caliber of player, and not being cocky about it, but just knowing that deep down within my work and within the way I go about playing the game every day.
It's Gunnar Henderson also was a number one prospect. He's also in the same clubhouse as Jackson, so I got to check in with both of them yesterday while the Orioles were at Fenway Park. And Gunnar Henderson said, "It's really cool," and then it happens, and then you're like, okay, now it's not important because it's all about whatever kind of big leaguer I'm going to be, and kind of the thing that drives him is being the best player on the field every day in the big leagues. Yeah. How much do you think about that part, about like how you define what success is?
Yeah, I think it can be skewed sometimes because there's a lot of rankings, and there's something coming out by someone new every day who has something different to say, right? And I think the main thing is that, like he had just mentioned, it doesn't really matter once you get to these levels and the highest level. It's nice to go in there knowing that you're the number one prospect, but I think nobody really cares.
Yeah.
And once you get up there, and even here, like you have that target on your back, but it doesn't change the way you go about your work every day. You continue to do what's gotten you here, and you continue to work your tail off every single day in order to maintain that. And then, like I said, whenever the time comes that I'm at the highest level, that doesn't matter anymore and vanishes after a few at-bats anyway.
Right.
So,
as Jackson's also experienced, right? Yeah. Like, and we talked about that, like the idea that, like, he was a 20-year-old in the big leagues making the opening day roster, and he wasn't quote unquote supposed to go 2 for 34, but the reality is that that everyone prospect status doesn't guarantee what a transition to the highest level of baseball looks like.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I've seen it even with guys who are drafted, and even guys who get a lot of money out of the draft or different things, that there's so many expectations on guys, and in the end of the day, a lot of things don't pan out. And I think the main thing is that you gotta just continue to stick with what's gotten you there and continue to work harder and harder every single day. Because even when you are the number one prospect, there's still a lot that I can improve on, and still a lot that I need to do, and that I can do in order to help the team at the top win.
You've been very stubborn every time I've asked you about what you want to improve, in saying everything, right? Which I think speaks to the development mindset that you have, and part of the reason why you're really, why you end up here is because you care a lot about improving every aspect of your game. So let's set that question aside, because I think know the answer, but I do want to offer praise in that you are very attuned to not only getting better generally across the tools, but like in very specific ways, whether that's the kind of jumps that you get, the kind of routes that you get, or like the specific game situations, game awareness based on outs, based on count, etc. So that's all. So that's a long-winded compliment to you.
Yeah.
But maybe you can more comfortably tell me this: is there one thing that you're doing right now that 2 years ago, if I had asked you, like 2 years ago when you were drafted, 2 years and change, you're drafted as a 17-year-old, are you surprised by anything that you have done now, even accepting that you do have a lot of confidence?
Yeah, I think no matter how much confidence I've had, I don't know if you would ask me when I was drafted 2 years ago if I would be here right now or expected to be here right now. Because I probably would have told you the same thing I tell everyone going into every year, is that I don't set any expectations on myself. I don't say I have to be here at a certain time or I have to be in the big leagues at this time. Because to me that just puts more added pressure, and I think my goal is to just come in every day and learn as much as I can, especially at this level now, being with so many guys who have so much big league experience or who have a lot of years under their belt, a lot more than myself. Just kind of being a sponge to all the information. But you mentioned, I think just continuing to work on the little things, like I think going out there every day and being a really good base runner, and being flexible in all three outfield spots. Like last year, I played mainly center field, and now as I've gotten closer, just realizing how important it is to be flexible in each of those different outfield positions, and just testing my limits, testing my range, and using the minor leagues as a spot to, where the goal here is to help this team win, but at the same time to test my limits and see what I'm great at and see what needs work. So it's really just dialing in and finishing up with the little things here. And I think, like I mentioned, being good with my leads, being really good and dialing in the secondaries and being really good with my pre-pitch in the outfield and applying pressure on the defense when I'm getting out of the box, regardless of how hard I hit the ball. So it's
Liam Hendriks, by the way, like that was the thing that like caught his attention, was like he is putting pressure on the defense every time he's making contact. So there have been a lot of screaming, like the huge exit velos, like certainly get a lot of attention. But he was that was what really stood out to him, is like, this is not a kind of flip it on and off type of approach.
Yeah, and I think you look at the guys at the top, right? You look at Jaron Duran and all these guys that make such an impact, and even on other teams, you look at the guys who make the most impact in these 5-tool players, and look at Jaron, he hits a ground ball into the outfield and he's stretching it into a double more times than not. So
as you did in your first at bat in Worcester.
Yeah, and I think that when you do it at the top, it kind of sets the tone. Down in the lower levels, and credit to Epi. I've said it before. He did a great job at making sure that no matter what, how we were feeling, we were given 100% of what we had that day, and making sure that we get out of the box and play the game the right way. Because it's the little things like that help teams win games. And I can't speak for the big league level. I've never been there, but I saw it even at AA and even here. When you do things and you play the game the right way, it kind of rewards you back. And I think a lot of the teams that have success in the big leagues, there's a common denominator. It's a lot of guys who are willing to stretch that single into a double and are always constantly looking for that extra 90, and are just never complacent. And that's the kind of mindset we have here, and that they've built into us in the minor leagues here.
So you've had a lot of success in AAA. Was there a kind of eye-opening moment in AAA and the other way, where like maybe it was an experienced big leaguer, like with a sequence that you're like, whoa, anything along those lines that where you recognized, like different level?
I think the first week I was here, obviously hit the ground running with a few hits in my first game, and but quickly found out that shortly after that these guys don't miss as much, I think, as they do in AA. And it's the same game, and I'm still going out there and playing a kid's game. But I think what I learned is that it's just a little cleaner here, and that guys have more big league time and don't miss their spots as much, but they still miss. So I think just knowing that, but just struggling a little bit in that first week. I think it kind of helped me, just settle in and realize, okay, I'm going to have to be really good and really dialed in on every single pitch, every single play. Not that you don't always have to do that, but here more than ever, like I said, guys don't miss as much. But at the same time, never giving anyone too much credit, and just knowing that, I belong here and that I'm here to make an impact and help this team win.
So I guess I'll wrap up on this point. Your buddy Jackson was in the big leagues this year as a 20-year-old on opening day. There are a lot of guys who end up being number one overall prospect who end up in the big leagues, by opening day of the following year. How much do you think about? You said you're not goal-oriented. Nonetheless, the whole point is to compete in the big leagues. How much do you think about, do you think about taking those kind of finishing touches to make yourself available? How how ready do you feel if you were to get a call this September, or if or coming out of spring training next year, if they say it's your time?
Yeah, I have 100% confidence that I'll be ready for whatever they tell me. And with that being said, I'm going to take what I've gathered here in the mean playing here with the last week or so we have left coming up. Continue to just be all gas, and going into the off season, I'm going to give myself the best chance I can, and I'll be ready coming into spring training to if things happen, things may happen. But I'll be ready, and I'm going to give myself the best chance that I can, and I'll be ready.
Roman Anthony in Polar Park, thanks so much for joining.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Alex, great conversation. He becomes the first repeat offender on the 310 to Left podcast, the first two-time visitor.
Yeah, get named number one prospect in baseball, and that's your reward. Congratulations, Roman Anthony.
Yeah, I think he was hoping for a little more than that. But you can't, every time you hear him talk, anytime you're around him, the maturity of the guy. I mean, he has been the youngest player at virtually every level he's played professionally or close to it. But you'd never know from the way he carries himself.
Yeah, it's funny. I still think that he hasn't faced a pitcher who's older than him yet, and I think it's probably going to be a while before he does so. But I was talking to Liam Hendriks about him, because obviously Liam had gotten to know him a bit over the course of his AAA rehab assignment, and I said, yeah, like to see a guy carrying himself that way and hitting the ball that way as a 20-year-old. And he said, he's 20? I had no idea. He's a unit. Like he was, Liam was just kind of like floored by the idea that Roman Anthony is as good as he is and carries himself the way he does, and yet is as young as he is.
And again, the way he moves into number one, right, is you got a little help because Junior Caminero is no longer eligible to be number one. So he phases out of the prospect pool, right? And the number two guy becomes number one guy.
Right, you have to have once you hit 130 big league at bats, then you cease to be prospect eligible in the eyes of Baseball America, and you may still retain Rookie of the Year eligibility beyond that, but that's just kind of their bright line. And so, yes, Roman Anthony had been number two with the most recent Baseball America rankings in early September, and then Junior Caminero is called back up by the Rays, and so Roman Anthony ascendant.
And will probably be number one when you begin next season, which is when it sort of takes on a little more gravitas. But let's get to that whole process with Geoff Pontes. He's from Baseball America and has a lot more insight into the process and to the man himself, Roman Anthony, as we continue the conversation of the new number one prospect in all of baseball, Roman Anthony, here on the 310 to Left podcast. All right, so we've heard from the number one prospect in baseball. Let's find out how you get there. Geoff, take us into the, Junior ages out, so the number two becomes the number one. It's fortuitous timing here for Roman Anthony, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think, we always sort of anticipated this is going to happen. The funny thing is, I think, when I was watching Junior Caminero on the backfields of Fort Myers play against Roman Anthony in a AAA game, I think that, both Alex and I probably expected that Caminero would have graduated in May. Was up with the team, obviously, at the end of the season last year. It seemed like he was probably a shoo-in to graduate pretty early. Some injuries, and then, staying down in the minors obviously delayed that a little bit. And we rework our top 100 a few different times a year. We sort of did a final rework at the beginning of the month. There were some internal discussions. I think we're sort of in flux at this point in time where a lot of players graduated very quickly. There hasn't exactly been a ton of top prospects who have A, stayed healthy, or B, been productive and good on top of that. And Roman Anthony really was one of the few. And I think, he just has this really unique combination of really well-rounded plate skills, but also, some defensive value. He has the ability to run. Though he's not a super burner, I think you can expect, double-digit stolen bases. But the real selling card here is the hit tool plus the power. It's some of the most outlier power in the minor leagues. We're talking, 98th, 99th percentile, top 1 percentile sort of exit velocities and output in that regard.
Yeah, so let's dig in on that a little bit. So Roman Anthony hit one ball this year in Portland at 116 miles an hour. That's really hard. When you talk about his 90th percentile exit velocities, they're, I think, about 108, 109. all of that comes in the framework of him being 20 years old, right? Like, so try to explain to us about when you talk about the rarity, the kind of distinctiveness of Roman Anthony's skill set. Give us a little bit more context. What does all of that mean? What kind of a player do you forecast that he's going to become when you're talking about some of those skills, along with a guy who's striking out under 20% of the time in AAA?
Yeah, and I think it's really hard nowadays to sort of find that balance of elite power plus, average or better bat to ball skills. There's diminishing returns at a certain point when it comes to contact. So, has above average contact. The plate approach is really good. But I think you look at the fact that you said 20 years old and, he's in that top 1 percentile in terms of exit velocities. I think he'd be in the top 20 and 90th percentile, maybe top 15 in MLB based on what the numbers were in the minor leagues. And of course, a lot of that data was coming off of Hawkeye systems at AAA. So there's some assuredness in terms of those numbers being legitimate. But I think this is a middle of the order sort of masher, a guy that, isn't going to strike out a tremendous amount, can hit the ball out of the park to all fields. He has that sort of power, while also being able to grind out at bats, take what a pitcher gives him, really make a pitcher work to get him out. So he kind of fits that mold of a 3-4 hitter, a guy who's going to, get up there, probably take a minimum of like 5 pitches per at bat, if not a lot more, really grind out good arms. And, has the size and I think projection to still get maybe even stronger and to improve that hit tool even more. But yeah, when you look at a guy like this, there's just not many players in the major leagues or in the minors that have that sort of power. When I compare him to other prospects that we've seen in recent times, Gunnar Henderson is one that comes to mind that had that elite power plus the bat to ball skills, plus the approach. James Wood is another one. And I would say that Roman Anthony's contact skills are probably slightly better than Gunnar's or James Wood at the same point. And then you look at the production outside of a really cold month in the month of April in Portland, Maine. I think all of us here in New England are very familiar with how cold it gets up there in Portland. They had some series where you're kind of on and off again. I think their first couple games of the season were snowed out. I don't know how many times a kid from Southern Florida has seen snow in his life. I talked to him a little bit about that. He's been a slow starter, but really from May 1st on, he's been, pretty much 300, 400, 530 in terms of what the slash line has been, and all the underlying data backs it, and has just continued to be really productive throughout the season, hasn't slowed down at all at AAA, and in some regards, I think he's actually ticked up and gotten a little bit better at each level, improved. And I know just having talked to him, he's taking advantage of a lot of the resources that are there in Worcester, including, being one of the few AAA, if not the only AAA affiliate with an actual traject machine. So he's practicing against pitchers all the time, major leaguers, and, seems to be really locked in terms of taking that next step and potentially maybe even helping the team next year.
All right. First of all, we do not allow any negative comments of Portland, Maine on this podcast. Okay, as a proud native of Maine, wrong side. There's my Portland Hearts of Pine logo right there. But you know what? I do want to, because you wrote about this and he spoke about this. He's had cold Aprils 2 straight years. Right. And while that speaks to getting off to a slow start, it also speaks to a very young player, one of the youngest at his level everywhere he's been, having the confidence to still battle through a slow start. Like that speaks to his maturity, doesn't it?
Yeah, I really think it does. And, I've had 3 or 4 conversations with Roman now between the Prospect Pad, which is an event we throw at the Futures game every year. Certainly up in Worcester a couple of times over the last few weeks. And it's just somebody that I think, you see this with some of the top prospects and the guys that do project to be, potential well above average, potential multi-time all-stars. It's the guys who really cherish putting in the work and, don't mind struggling. And I think that was one of the things when we chatted about a few different things the last time I talked to him, but one was sort of about a bigger article I wrote about the traject machine and the usage of it in player development. And it's something that, he realizes guys don't hit off that machine well because it's the most perfect version of like every pitcher you've ever faced. And you never face the most perfect version of every pitcher because not every pitch is exactly the same, right? They're like snowflakes. But I think, you look at a guy like this and it's like, he'll go in there, he'll take that work, to heart, just so he'll be ready at game time. And I think that's something that he really stressed is just, he'd be crazy not to utilize all the information that's available to him, not to utilize all the resources that are available to him. And I think when you see sort of a data-driven organization like the Red Sox, and one that is, become very focused, particularly and honed in on the hitting side in terms of using technology, the bat speed programs, all these other things that we've heard throughout the year. He's someone who's really embraced that. And I think we've seen huge jumps from the player he was as an amateur to the player that he was last year. And each level, it almost seems like he takes another step up and improves. And that's typically a sign of some of the best prospects, the most prestigious prospects, the guys that turn out to be future all-stars and well above average regulars. They have that sort of mentality in the mix. And I think he does have, you wouldn't know he was a 20-year-old when you talk to him. Certainly looks young, but just in terms of his work, his focus, his understanding of what it takes to be really good, I think all that stuff is there. And it's another reason that we were really comfortable sort of putting him in that number one spot heading into the offseason. And I would, guess that he's not going to be replaced in the offseason. We typically don't do that. If we crown somebody number one, there's not much Roman Anthony could do at this point, to fall off of that perch with only, a few games left in the season.
So when you crown a new number one, is there a formal ceremony? Did you show up at Polar Park and bring him a crown? I brought him these little balloons, kind of floated those around.
No, I mean, I think it's just a deeper conversation, and I think this was probably one of the less obvious conversations that we've had in a while. A few years ago when I first came on staff, it was sort of a three-way battle between Adley Rutschman, Julio Rodriguez, Bobby Witt Jr. All those guys have worked out to be really good. That was followed by a battle between Gunnar Henderson and Corbin Carroll. Both of those guys have turned out to be really, really good performers. And then this year, Jackson Holliday, he slipped a little bit. We jumped James Wood over him. Wood then graduates. Holliday slides back in, and then Caron. So this year has actually been a little bit more in flux than previous years. But I think that this was, sort of a true sort of off-season number one. We're crowning this guy. He's probably going to hold this title until he graduates, barring some really, unforeseen circumstances. And I think, the thing that he has that maybe Holliday didn't have is he does have that power. And the reason that power is so important, the hit tool is obviously important. We know that he has that. We know he has the on-base ability, but it's the mishits. You get up to the major leagues and, you're not always going to hit everything perfectly. You're not always going to find the barrel. Those mishits lead to more production when you're hitting the ball consistently at 105, 106 plus. And we see that all the time with Anthony.
All right, you talked about best versions of yourself, right? So if you're a Red Sox fan, you've seen a lot of Roman Anthony, we've seen quite a bit of Roman Anthony. Most fans have not seen a lot of Roman Anthony. What are they going to see? What will be the best version of Roman Anthony in a few years with the Red Sox?
Yeah, I think, you're probably looking at a long-term corner outfielder, better defensively than Manny Ramirez, but I do think as somebody who grew up watching a lot of Manny Ramirez, there's a lot of similarities just in terms of that plate approach, that big power, the ability to change a game with a single swing. Somebody who does balance, batting average and lower strikeout numbers with big power, with on-base ability. And we really haven't had anybody like that in a while. I mean, certainly Mookie Betts. I think, Betts is a different body type, a more twitchy player, a guy who wasn't as highly touted as a prospect, of course. So I don't want to make that comparison, but I do think this is, the best hitter that they've probably developed since that point, just in terms of what the ceiling is. And, we know what the dimensions are at Fenway Park. I think a lot of fans out there, look at, Pesky's pole and say, oh, it's easy to hit the ball out to right field at Fenway, not realizing that it juts out about 60, 70 feet out there into the bullpen. You need to have 70 power to be able to sort of power that out there. We think about the power hitters that have been left-handed in Red Sox history that have had a lot of success. David Ortiz, Ted Williams, all those type of guys had that huge power. And Anthony falls right in line historically with a lot of those top Red Sox, power hitters that are left-handed. I think he's somebody that has the power to power the ball out to right field consistently. and have it not get caught up, as we saw, with a guy who had less power like an Andrew Benintendi when he sort of tried to, really lean into the pull side power, and it just simply didn't work.
So Roman Anthony is, you have him as the number 1 overall prospect in baseball. He's not alone as a really good prospect in the Red Sox system, and specifically just in AAA, right? Like, you have the group of Anthony, Marcelo Meyer, Christian Campbell, and Kyle Teal, not necessarily in that order. I realize that it's subject to debate, in the top 25 among prospects now, recognizing that isn't necessarily the order that it'll be entering next year. How unusual is it to have a cluster of 4 top 25 prospects in baseball, and what does that mean for the Red Sox moving forward?
Yeah, I think it is unusual. But the teams that have had these sort of clusters of top prospects all together, that typically portends pretty well for future success. You look at the teams that have won World Series, maybe, the Texas Rangers sort of being the exception, and then the 2009 Yankees. Pretty much every one of those teams, whether it be the Cubs, whether it be the Astros, even those Cardinals teams that won in like 2011, there's a core there of, similarly aged players that sort of come up at the same time. We saw it with the Red Sox last core. That puts you into that competitive window. We've seen it with the Orioles recently, where they had that young core, and that's really put them into that competitive window. And it's up the middle players too. I think that's what the exciting part of it is you have a catcher in Kyle Teal, who's a really well-rounded player, still, refining his defending, but is a really balanced hitter, does a lot of things really, really well at the plate. You have Christian Campbell, who probably is a second baseman long-term, though I know he's been playing shortstop. I think you can make a case at this point, though it's not in our rankings, but I know that talking to scouts and front office people from other organizations, there are a lot of people that view Christian Campbell as a top 5 to 10 prospect. And I think that the numbers speak for themselves. That's a huge testament and a huge win for Red Sox hitting development and their bat speed program in particular. You have Marcelo Meyer, who's been the most highly touted dating back to his prep days of this group. Obviously has dealt with some injuries, but has had his best professional season in 2024, regardless of how it ended. He's a shortstop, I think at the very least a third baseman. And then, you have Anthony. So it's like you have this quartet of players plus a lot of other talented players. I think that there's a chance if Luis Perales doesn't get injured earlier in the season, this is someone that really was trending toward the top 50 as well. It's a very talented system. There's talent at the upper minors. There's some talent at the lower minors with guys like Franklin Arias as well. I think that there's a good chance that when we redo the system rankings based on some of the jumps that Campbell and Anthony have made, this could be the top farm system in baseball. For my personal preference, I would say that this is the best farm system in baseball. I know, Alex, you do the rankings in the off season. I do them in season. I have, another 5 teams that I cover and then oversee another 3. So about a third of the league I have a really good grasp on. And, I think this is a deep system. I think that, there's probably even some names that fans aren't necessarily familiar with, Delvinson, Reyes, and some of these guys who are starting to pop. They're really interesting. We saw Justinson Garcia. That name is always the password. Made a huge step forward just in terms of, the bat to ball skills have gotten to a point that they need to be at. There's power there. There are, some contact. The approach, I think, still needs to be refined. It's a really exciting system. And I think that that's the best part of it is even outside of this cluster in the top 4, 5, 6, there's still even more players coming. And we're not even talking about, Braden Montgomery, who was one of the best hitters in the draft and one of the best hitters in the SEC last year. We'll see when he's fully healthy what he can do under this player development regime, and potentially the addition of more bat speed there, even more power getting unlocked, I think is really interesting.
So I want to. My last question for you relates to Christian Campbell, who to me this one has been a kind of insane rocket ship of for a prospect. But I even have you mentioned that you have some evaluators talking about him as top 5 to 10. I've heard some people who think that he's a better prospect than Roman Anthony, your number 1 overall prospect. How crazy has his emergence been from? I had him like just outside of the top 30 last year when I was doing the Red Sox rankings. To see a guy go from outside the top 30, outside of the top 250 draft prospects in 2023 to being a top 25 player in baseball, When have you seen that?
I don't think we've seen it. We tried to go back, so he's likely to be our minor league player of the year. I would assume at this point there isn't really a whole lot of competition there. And we went back, and I don't think we can find a single minor league player of the year that was ranked outside of their organization's top 30 list. So we're talking the top 900 players in the game. And there was some buzz in spring. I know that the Red Sox were really talking to everyone they could about, hey, like, you better, be on the lookout for for Christian Campbell and what this guy can do. I think we even talked about it on the backfields, and I think we all had a healthy skepticism. You hear the stuff from teams all the time. You're expecting, okay, he's probably better than we thought, but we'll see if the contact stays, if the approach stays, all the things that he was really good at in high school, and then when he was at Georgia Tech. And even talking to area scouts, the first day on the Cape, it was really funny. It's sort of a reunion of sorts where I'm working pro ball all throughout spring training, and then the first couple months of the season, and then halfway through June, I head on down to the Cape Cod League to cover that, and I start to see more area scouts, folks that are on the amateur side, and the big buzz was, hey, what's going on with Christian Campbell? The numbers are incredible, and the feedback that we're hearing is that this is one of the better prospects in baseball, one of the better players in last year's draft. And guys were just like, I saw this guy at the ACC tournament. I didn't see that at all. I never expected this guy to, have that sort of impact or grow into that sort of power. And I think he's the kind of name that gets a lot of buzz just, around the industry, behind the scenes, when you're talking to scouts and front office people of, that this was a major victory for the Red Sox. And it's just so unusual. You don't see guys that come from outside the top 30 jump up that much in their own organization's list, let alone jump into the top 100. And he went well beyond that, jumping into the top 25. And, I think that, I was making a case that maybe this guy should be top, 10 or 12, 13, somewhere in that range on our list, just based on what the production's been, what the skills are, what the underlying data says, because he's very similar to Anthony in the sense that there's bat to ball skills there, there's approach there. And there's plus power. It's not quite on par with Roman Anthony's power. He can play a few different positions. He's certainly not going to be a shortstop. I think probably a pretty good second baseman long term. And I even think, if the Red Sox were in first place right now, is there maybe a chance in that hypothetical situation that Campbell was their starting second baseman a month ago? I don't know. But for someone to really make this much of a jump just in terms of their profile, it's really, really unusual.
Well, he has helium, so you can use the balloons to indicate his minor league player of the year status. I will say that in spring training, what you said that the Red Sox were kind of getting excited about him. One official said, if he does what we think he's going to do, he's going to finish the year in the top 25 as a prospect in all of baseball. So that's a good forecast. Yep.
Yeah, and it's good if you can forecast like that and be realistic about it. But it's when you hear stuff like that, it's always, it seems like hyperbole, but often it's proven right. A year later, guys don't necessarily completely talk out of their butts and that sort of thing. So I did not expect this at all. I don't think this guy adding bat speed. We thought he could be a good prospect. I thought it was a guy that would be within the Red Sox top 10. I never imagined that, we would be here sort of on a call in early September like we were, arguing that maybe this guy was a top 10 prospect in the game overall.
Talking out of their butts was the original name for this podcast when we first workshopped it, but 310 to left seems to work better. Geoff, it was great stuff. Thanks for the insight. Really, we'll do this again because it's such a fascinating time to watch this group working their way forward. And I think, Red Sox fans are so caught up in that top layer that they haven't really paid attention, as you just pointed out, to what's coming up behind them. And I think that's what's really fascinating, the depth. We understand how good the top of this group is. I don't think fans fully understand the depth that they've built at the minor league level.
Yeah, and it's just a matter of going and getting some pitching over the next couple of years and starting to build that development arm, and it would really be a machine. I think that's the biggest question. But you can also build a contender without having a ton of top pitching prospects. We saw that with the Orioles.
Right, exactly right. Now, Geoff, we appreciate the visit. Thanks for coming by. Geoff Pontes from Baseball America, shedding a little light on Roman Anthony and some of the players behind him. Thanks, Geoff.
Thanks, Jeff, and stop your hatred of Portland.
Yes, we will have
love
none
Portland.
of it. We will have none of that here. It is warm year-round.
It's just a little cold.
It is a little cold. It is a little cold. I will admit, it's a little cold.
In
Jeff
April,
Pontes with
in
us.
June, I was
In
up there,
April.
and it was wonderful.
See, there's no better place.
No better
than
place
June.
in New England.
That's right. Just stay indoors in April. It's fine. Go get a lobster roll. Geoff Pontes, Roman Anthony, good episode. Thanks for joining us in this edition of